Well, if I said I wasn't surprised by some of what I'm seeing on the bracket today, JB, I would be lying. We're going to have an interview coming up here, and we're going to be definitely asking some questions. Some of the questions you out there have asked us to ask, but others too that you might not have known to ask at the time that bracket he's holding up, wasn't out yet. How you feeling over there?
Well, sometimes it's okay to be proven wrong because as we talked about on our Twitter space Saturday night and kind of leading up to it, there were a couple of potential selections where I thought I knew what the committee was going to do just based on historic precedents and maybe bias towards certain programs, but they did not do that. And so on one hand, I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. This is something different and unexpected. But then a couple of the choices, I was like, whoa, really? Well, kind of one of them, I guess, was really a surprise. I don't know where that came from. So I'm looking forward to talking to Matt and seeing kind of where the committee came up with this. Because, hey, we were mostly right, but not entirely. And that's okay, but definitely have some questions here.
Got some splaining to do. No, just kidding. Anyway, let's get this off the ground and running here. This is season 16 of In the Huddle, our Selection Sunday special. For the 16th straight season, 15 years of it, we are going to have the selection committee chairman join us, Matt Moore from Northwestern of Minnesota. Like we said, we'll have some pretty sharp questions for him because you've been asking some really good questions in the Twitter sphere or the X sphere at this point. And so that will be coming up in this show. One thing I'll tell you is that we're basically going live to tape the way we're trying to do certain pieces of the show because we do not have much editing time the way that Selection Sunday falls. So any errors you see, we're pretty much leaving in unless they're glaring and we have the time to take them out. So we apologize in advance for anything that might be flubbed up a little bit with production here, but we're trying. JB, first things first, I'm going to give you the 30,000-foot view, not of Week 11. We'll talk about that at another point in time, but of this bracket setup right now. We'll show the whole thing, obviously, which you're not going to be able to read, folks, but there it is, what we received from the NCAA. And just for those wondering if it gets to, JB just got his glasses out. If it gets to the look of the WestCon record, we did inform them. The one we have is wrong. They are 7-2. It didn't make a difference in where they got seeded around and all that stuff. So it was an unintentional error on the NCAA's part, and we don't have the ability to edit it really in this. So now your 30,000-foot view of the brackets generally.
I think it's. At the end of the day, this is kind of a thankless job. It's really hard to do, to put 32 teams and figure out with all the cost constraints and you don't want to spend too much money on the flights and the this and that and the other thing. There was some interesting placement. One of the things that sort of jumps out to me right off the top, it looks like La Crosse, Wartburg, Mount Union, and Johns Hopkins are the ones. And it also looks like to me that North Central, the defending national champs, more on that in a bit, and Whitewater, Susquehanna, and Randolph-Macon are your twos. So I like the fact that Region 2 and Hopkins got a 1. I think that was deserved. It's been a while, and so that's a very interesting bracket down there in the lower right. The upper right, interesting to see some of these teams having to go on the road, but Cortland going to Endicott. Hey, well, they did beat Hardin-Simmons, so they probably deserved a host based on that. The Wartburg placement as a 1, we kind of saw coming based on the way the regional rankings had laid out. But seeing North Central as a number 2 is a little bit of surprise. And honestly, in a way, I've kind of been coming around to the idea that La Crosse as a 1 is a bit of a question mark too, because they did have that head-to-head loss to Hardin-Simmons, who also happened to lose to Endicott, a Region 1 team, which historically has always been viewed as sort of the, the redheaded you-know-what of D3 football. So it does say a lot of, there's still a little bit of intrinsic bias that lacrosse gets the one, and more power to them. Certainly winning the WIAC is not an easy thing to accomplish. And so in that respect, maybe that's how they deserve that. But, hey, we'll have to see how it shakes out. The biggest question mark I think we're going to have here, Frank, is Co getting in, likely as the last team off the board. Where did that come from? Because we did not talk about them really at all. And St. John's is missing. Okay, go for it.
I'm going to call timeout because actually, I see him in our screen. We're about a half hour early on this, and he looks like he's ready to go already. And so instead of talking through the bracket ourselves, why don't we go to the guy that helped make these brackets happen in the first place so he can get his day moving as well. So like I said, we're live to tape for a reason here, folks, in the way we'll work it. But for the 15th straight year, 16th straight season, we are really, really honored to have as a guest the selection committee chairman, Matt Moore of Northwestern Minnesota, joins us here. And Matt, I'm guessing it was a long 24 hours. Maybe you got some sleep, maybe you didn't. I don't know. But thanks for joining us first off, and let us know what your last 24 hours have been like, for that matter. And hold on, we're gonna make sure we get you loud and clear. There you go. Go ahead.
It's a productive 24 hours, right? But it's a busy 24 hours too, where really you go right from those final games getting played, waiting for the final games to wrap up out on the West Coast in order to get the score reporting and things like that, and then waiting for all the racks to be able to meet and to rank and to get things set up, and then as a national committee trying to go over those rack rankings as they're coming in, and then start to process some of the at-large opportunities and things like that, all the way to the bracketing. So yeah, pretty busy. Goes late into the night Saturday and then starts early on Sunday, and kind of click it right until we need until the NCAA needs that bracket from us.
So Matt, normally we wouldn't do this, but like I said, we wanted to jump on this to get you freed up for later on. But if you're willing to, we're going to walk through the different quadrants real quick and call out some things that we're seeing as questions as we do it. If you're okay with that, we'll roll with it here a little bit. And first things first, in the upper left hand, we'll just go basically counterclockwise from the upper left. Wisconsin lacrosse, Minnesota Morris. I'm kind of sorry we're talking to you, because if we weren't talking to you, that means your team would have gotten in. Close game against Minnesota Morris yesterday, and congratulations to them for getting the Pool A bid, obviously. Aurora versus Co. I'm not going to stop yet. Let's go down these, because there's going to be a couple questions that emanate from this quadrant. Trinity will be hosting Hardin-Simmons, and North Central will be hosting Belhaven. This may be the most controversial quadrant I have ever seen, because I know what the reactions are going to be out there from a number of different factions. So let's start from the top. Right. How the hell is Co on here? I guess is what a lot of people are going to ask us the question of. Because they were not on our radar, D3 Football's radar, or many people's radars out there in D3 Nation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think if you look at their body of work and kind of what they have for their numbers and what they did, a 9-1 team who have a loss to a number 1 ranked team in Wartburg, and what they were able to do with their strength of schedule and some of those things, they compete and their numbers hold up, and they end up getting in as an at-large bid.
I'm gonna take it an extra step, and JB was wondering the same thing. So 503 and 1-1 is what we have basically. Maybe you have different numbers that you're looking at, and there's teams like St. John's with the extra loss, but 2-1, I believe, or maybe even 3-1, depending on who is in the regional rankings, in over 600 strength of schedule. Muhlenberg with the 0-1, but the 545, 550-ish, I think it was. In the strength of schedule. But you get my point where I'm going with this, that basically Region 5 has enough ability to rank a third team in certain conferences out there. And Region 2, for instance, doesn't have that ability because of the depth of conference champions of merit that are in there. So it's almost like people are going to say you lined up, or Region 5 lined up their conference in a way that manufactured a regional ranked opponent win for Co. And as a result, despite the mediocre strength of schedule, they get in. What would your reaction be to the folks from St. John's and from, let's say, Muhlenberg even out there that are going to say this doesn't smell right or feel right to us?
Yeah, I think my number one deal was, we're following the primary criteria, right? We're going to try and follow the primary criteria all the way through. We're going to put our regions aside when it comes down to finding those Pool C bids. It's not about our region or somebody's region or anything. We're trying to develop the best tournament that we can. And I think the 4 at-large bids that all got in were pretty consistent with what their numbers are and what their history was in order to get in.
Yeah, the one consistent thing that I saw, and I don't know to what extent you can speak to this, is a lot of them had 9 wins overall, and they also had wins at a regionally ranked level. Perhaps that was the thing that sort of tipped the scales in their favor. I mean, I remember when you spoke with Pat on D3Football.com, you guys talked about with the NCAA guidance of a win is a win, regardless of whether it's by 1 point or 50 in certain cases, as we see on some weekends. Were there certain elements to that or was it really just, okay, we're following the script and we're just going to try not to deviate from that as much as we can?
We certainly were trying to follow the script, right? We're trying to follow, again, the goal is always to stay on the criteria because that's the one guidance that we have as we go through. And I would say, win-loss percentage is one of those columns. We always say, you guys have probably heard the term a million times. We don't count columns, right? One column doesn't have more value than the other, and we don't count who has the most columns or anything, but it's that body of work through all those columns for the primary criteria that's where we try to have that consistency as the national committee, where when you look at it as a whole, that all 4 of those teams do kind of have a similar matchup or makeup with those columns.
So let's continue back on this upper left hand, and Trinity Hardin Simmons is something that breeds a lot of questions as well. Trinity is going to be hosting Hardin Simmons. From our numbers, and tell me if we're wrong on this, it was a .007 differential in strength of schedule. Trinity, they had their win against Barry, who didn't get into the tournament. Hardin Simmons had their win against number 1 in the West, we believe, or in the West. You see how I'm dating myself, in Region 6, UW La Crosse. And a lot of people are going to say to you, look, that win versus La Crosse should probably carry more value than the win versus Barry and should have been enough to push Hardin Simmons into a hosting position. What would your reaction be to that for folks? Because, again, maybe it relies on some level of subjectivity, but maybe not, because La Crosse was a 1, at least that's the way it was drawn up coming into the week, in one of the regions, and that seems to carry some level of weight, you would think.
This is where the regional part of it being a regionally ranked AQ tournament comes in, right? So it's not a true national ranked 1 through 32 tournament. There is that regionality of it. And as we all know, there are, there's some constraints with locations when we're trying to match teams up. So in this instance, right, Trinity's a number 2 in their region and Hardin Simmons is the number 3. And so that's where Trinity ends up getting getting the nod to be the host for it. And again, that's one of those ones too, if you look at where we typically try to avoid matchups that have occurred, whether it's in the regular season or in the conference play or things like that, that's usually a goal. In this case, this is a repeat matchup of, maybe last year's playoffs, right? So again, if we have the opportunity and when we can, we try to avoid those things, but sometimes as you're trying to put all these together, you do the best that you can to get a good matchup and create a nice bracket with it.
Now, JB, we'll ask you a question about the defending national champion and how they're feeling about life today. Here you go, JB. I'll tee you up.
Yeah, we got a lot of funny memes from the Cardinals fans about, poking the bear and, taking the rake to the hornet's nest and, the disrespect of putting the defending champs anywhere else but than a 1 seed. But like you said, you guys were following the criteria, and what we saw earlier in the week was that they were number 2 in Region 5 because of things like regionally ranked opponents and whatnot. I guess you can only play who's on your schedule, but it is interesting placement that they're here. And if I'm also a Trinity or Hardin Simmons fan, it's like, oh great, after I win this game, I got to go play NCC in the next round. I guess what was kind of the thought process around that?
Yeah, it's the tough part about it is when North Central is number 2 in their region, it's like, how do you place them somewhere differently with it? Again, defending national champion, right? But that's not one of the primary criteria as you're looking at things. And so again, to be consistent across all the regions, to be consistent throughout the tournament with how things are bracketed and how things are placed from a regionality standpoint, that's what you end up doing. That's where North Central ends up falling for this bracket.
One thing, though, that I will bring up that people will ask us to bring up, so this is from conversations we've had, there is the notion that if there are 2 teams are undefeated and there's a tie, that it goes back to the previous year's results in playoffs situation. What you're basically saying through this process, or at least the Region 5 RAC and then the National Committee through, given the check mark on it, I guess, is that there wasn't deemed to be a tie between Wartburg and North Central sufficient to use that optional final criteria that's out there. Is that accurate to say that?
I think it's accurate. I think when you look at the strength of schedule on that, and again, we know, everybody knows across the country, right? Teams are handcuffed almost by their strength of schedule sometimes and what they have. And but at the end of the day, if we're going to follow the criteria that the NCAA has given us, right, in order to be consistent across the country with what we're doing, this is what we have to do, and this is what we end up having to put together.
Bottom left, real quick here, Wartburg will be hosting Illinois College. Whitworth, after their big win versus Linfield yesterday, gets to host, as expected, Chapman because of the travel restrictions, etc. That's a flight, obviously, and then the winner will be facing a flight again. So you guys definitely have a number of flights that maybe a couple of which were quasi-avoidable, but you kind of went all in on the flights, and kudos to you for mixing it up a little bit in that respect. We didn't have an island pod per se in this whole thing. We had a couple teams here, a couple teams there, but not put together purposely for that reason. Wheaton, which is an at-large, hosting Mount St. Joseph, and Whitewater, which was also an at-large, hosting Bethel. And the irony here is if the 2 at-larges get through to the next round, we'll have an at-large versus an at-large in round 2 in that game. But seeing Bethel here will make me ask the question on behalf of St. John's fans, and some fans that actually reached out to us today want this question asked. What is the value of playing, losing, and or beating a conference champion? And in this case, with Bethel having been beaten by St. John's, but still not winning the conference, how do you handle that situation? Because clearly St. John's didn't make the tournament, even though that situation occurred and existed, and with some very good numbers there for St. John's. How did that factor in or not factor in ultimately when you look at these things?
Well, obviously that impacts their strength of schedule, right? Who their opponents are and what their records are against those opponents, which they have a strong one in part with that. The MIAC has an AQ, right? And how it's set up right now in the MIAC with that championship, that and how the AQ is determined, it's different than some of the other conferences with that. So I'm not sure that gives you a good answer. This is where you start to get kind of pinched, right? Yeah. With where we only have 4 at-large bids on these things. This is one of those reasons why, as you look to wanting to expand the playoffs and add some teams and things like that, it's for reasons like that where you feel like how a conference championship or an AQ is determined and things like that may block what you're able to do on a national level to continue to develop the bracket and the tournament as well as you can.
JB, any questions on the bottom left on your end there? As I pointed out, Wheaton and Wisconsin Whitewater, 2 of the at-larges right there in front of us there.
No, I mean, I think we had spoken. We thought that Wheaton might be one of the maybe the second to last team pick, so I'm not surprised to see them there. I mean, obviously St. Joe's is conference champion, and Bethel. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess if you're not a Johnny's fan, you could basically say, well, maybe we shouldn't have lost that game to Gustavus. I mean, that could have made all the difference there, 9-1 instead of 8-2. You don't know. That's sometimes how it shakes out. It makes all these weeks of regular season play that important. So no questions for me. But I guess more of a comment than anything. And I'm sure Matt, as a football coach, knows that every week counts. So it adds up at the end.
Yeah.
Let's go bottom right, and we're going to see our last at large here. Johns Hopkins hosting WestCon, as we said, 7-2. So they'll get that fixed at the home office, I'm sure. Del Val is going to host Union, the final at-large pick here. And this is the only at-large that will not be hosting, ironically enough. Co as well. So Co and Union not hosting, but Whitewater and Wheaton are hosting. So something to be discussed there maybe in a second. Springfield hosts Ithaca. That one will get some eyebrow raises for sure, because Ithaca's going to claim we had the best freaking SOS in the country. Can't you do us a favor here with who we played? And the answer is no. Right. Clearly not. Springfield will be hosting that one. And Randolph-Macon hosting Christopher Newport. A very, very interesting matchup, because these teams have, I believe, history against each other, if memory serves. And so keeping it kind of in the home area there for these teams, indeed. But what does go into, people ask me throughout the week, Matt, just because you're not large, does that mean you're always on the road? And the answer was no, not always. And right here in this bracket, we're seeing 2-2 basically in this. What do we read into that, if anything?
Well, part of it is that those regional rankings, right, where we try to respect what the racks have put out in the rankings, and those, whether 1 and 2 seeds in a region, or, one rank or second ranked teams in the region. I believe Whitewater's a number 2 seed. I think Wheaton is is ranked number 2 in the region. Wheaton maybe 3 or 4. I can't recall right off the top of my head. But again, we're trying to give those teams ranked higher a home game off of that.
And the last regional rankings, I was just going to say, last regional rankings will be published, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So we'll see those soon. Maybe either tonight or tomorrow on that. JB, sorry to cut you off there. Go ahead.
This is more of a comment than a question. I'm just happy to see that Hopkins looks like a one, whether it's a seed or a ranking, whatever we want to call it. Typically, just based on that location, as a potential anchor there. I think Region 2. It had a very incredibly competitive season. I still don't really understand the whole 7 versus the 9 and having kind of the right percentage. I don't know if that's something we can talk about on this show, or it's just one of those things that the NCAA, we've heard the answer once, and so we kind of know what the deal is, but just thought I'd bring it up one more time. But I credit the committee. It's good to see Hopkins there, being an original Region 2 guy, I guess you could say, former East Region back in the day. But yeah, I like that for a number of reasons.
Matt, to his point.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say, Hopkins, obviously, you look at their schedule, and they're 10-0 with a high strength of schedule, and their numbers and what they did. They certainly have put themselves in a position to be able to host some games in the tournament, and I think we were consistent with that across the bracket.
And to his point, though, look, we did get the answer from JP, but I mean, does it handcuff Region 2, do you feel, when you have that many teams? Only about 14% of the teams get ranked, I think is what my figure was, versus what was, I think, the original goal being 20%. And some regions are at the 20% or more level, which means that there's just less space to rank teams for Region 2, and might hurt generally the positions. It didn't hurt Johns Hopkins, it looks like. But, just give me your insight there about just ranking 7 across the board versus maybe going to how deep a region really is, and then basing the number of teams you rank from there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the simple answer is no. I don't think it hindered or hurt anybody in that regard. I think if anything, it shows a lot of strength in that region too. You know, as you look at it, that's a strong region. You look at the numbers they put from top to bottom. I think it's one that, regardless of the number of teams or what it is, there's strong numbers and strong records that are coming out of that region in a good way. And again, from a consistency standpoint, by focusing on the criteria and what we're doing, I think we were able to still be pretty respectful of all those teams and with the numbers.
And one of the other things that we've heard over the years, last year maybe we heard a little pull away from this, so I'm just curious to see if this is still kind of in the mix. There used to be, we were told that you would spot the ones and the twos, 1 seeds and 2 seeds, and not seed really the rest of it because there would be no need to, and then build pods around the ones and the twos, and then attach the pods to geographically how you could avoid flights or at least get some kind of geography in mind in those pods. Do you still try to find the ones and the twos and then handle it that way, but then sometimes you might not be able to do it perfectly because of the different geographical challenges you find in this bracketing?
Yeah, we don't do any seeding with it, you know, as we go through it. So there's really no seeding. What the word I would use is more like tiers, where we try to find what are those top tier teams, the 1 and 2s in each of the regions, and we try to respectfully kind of put them in different clusters, you know, different areas of the bracket, right? And so that develops a little bit, and then from there it becomes very regional, right? Where we're trying to develop some good regional matchups. You know, you think of flights, but you also think of, you know, mom and dad having to drive, you know, 200 miles or having to take a flight to go watch their son play, or fan bases, right? Students being able to go travel. And so, you know, a lot of that regionality comes in because you want to have great crowds and you want to have great matchups through it. So to answer you, no, but we do try to navigate it. The term I would use is more of a tier structure with it.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. Okay, there are questions that come from the final quadrant here. First off, the Drive of Death goes to Alfred State. Congratulations, Alfred State, on winning the ECFC, and you get to go to Alliance, Ohio as your first round game. Congratulations. Hey, look, you know what? I think everybody and their brother kind of saw this game coming, so there it is. But then you look at Alma DePaul with 10-0 versus 10-0. I'll continue for a second. Endicott and Cortland at 9-1 and 9-1. And Susquehanna versus Grove City at 10-0 and 10-0. And there are going to be people out there that say, shouldn't 10-0 be avoided in the first round to at least reward teams that are undefeated? To a certain degree, you know, that's a rare air type of situation. I remember just today putting DePaul finally into my top 25 ballot because I'm like, look, they're 10-0. They deserve to be ranked in that way. You guys don't use that as a criterion. I get that. But, you know, they were undefeated. Grove City was undefeated, and they don't get to host in either case. That's going to be a pretty interesting discussion when people see this later on today. Obviously, we're doing this a little bit earlier. What's your message to those folks that are going to be a little upset by that one?
Yeah, again, you know, we try to get we try to use those regional rankings with the top 1 or 2 teams and try to make sure that they're able to host some. And then again, it's a regional tournament from that standpoint. And so as you're trying to find the matchups that fit under certain, whether it's mileage criteria or just trying to develop a good matchup and trying to have teams that maybe did, you know, some of these teams I think played each other during the season. So you want to avoid those in the first round. That's kind of how you end up building it.
Go ahead, JB.
Well, I would just kind of in bigger picture, you know, Matt, this is the first time that we've only had 4 Pool C bids, and you know, I imagine when you got, you know, put into this position as the committee chair, did you reach out to, you know, any prior committee chairs like a Coach Cat or somebody to get some advice? Because really, I mean, having one less team to choose from doesn't make things any easier. What was kind of your process going into this whole thing in the first place?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. So there's, you know, whether it's JJ Neckloff from, you know, last year or, you know, Dewey Nats and some of the other guys that have been on the committee and that I know. So absolutely, I use the opportunity to be able to visit with them and kind of how they navigate it and what they've done. And obviously being able to be on the committee, this is my 4th year, having seen it done for, 2 of those years, one of them not. Just kind of trying to find out what they felt like we needed to focus on and what was most important. Absolutely.
One more grand question in the scheme of things here. J.P. Williams, who's, I'm not sure if he's able to listen in. We're having some technical issues on his end for some reason. I think the NCAA firewall is stronger than we thought this year. So luckily you weren't in the same room as him like most guys are. But we appreciate all of his help getting this together. And over the years, and including last week, we've had a conversation. I'm not shy to share this much of it, which is, look, because of only 9 or 10 results for these teams throughout for you to compare, it would be so much more helpful to have inter-regional matchups that would allow us to kind of balance things across regions and see who's who and what's what. So that's a message the NCAA has been sending for a number of years to us. But some of the picks here, or some of what we've seen, don't seem to necessarily embrace that as well as maybe some folks would want it to. We pointed out the Hardin-Simmons lacrosse situation earlier. That seems like Hardin-Simmons, if we were giving full faith to that kind of big trip they made, might have hosted instead. Okay, St. John's is sitting there saying, we played Trinity. My goodness, we played Trinity. A behemoth in their own right there, and we're not getting much credit for that at the end of the day. And there are others out there. And so I guess the question becomes, what does a team learn from this? Is it worth going out and spending $10,000 for a cross-country trip, or something maybe that Region 3 doesn't really have many opportunities without spending a lot of money to go and do an inter-region trip because of where they are? Region 1 sometimes just can lean on Region 2, except where Hardin-Simmons decides to fly up to Endicott. 3, 4, and 5 seem to have more ability, 4, 5, and 6 seem to have more ability to do the inter-regional thing. What's the messaging ultimately here, Matt, that allows folks to buy into the idea, yes, indeed, I'm going to take the risk and go play an out-of-conference game out of my region and spend the money to go do that here?
I would say, the short answer is yes, right? Because that's going to impact your strength of schedule. And that's one of the metrics that's used. That's one of the primary criteria as we're looking at it. And certainly then the win-loss percentages as well. And I think when it comes down to that regional ranking coming out of it, it's what is happening the rest of your region, and what are those teams doing in order to be able to compete with them, or what does that end up looking like with your record as well. So I think, you've got the teams like the St. John's who are going to go play anybody, right? And there's a lot of great teams that are out there willing to go play people and looking to go play people because they want to compete with the best teams. And I think they should be honored for that. But at the end of the day, when you have you only have the 4 at-larges, that's what ends up handcuffing you, not so much what those results were or what the other things. It's that access ratio, right? And how many schools we actually have in this postseason tournament.
Matt, we're going to give you the last word here with any insights, any thoughts you want to deliver to D3 Nation about your work here, your committee, anything else. This is a very special one as it's number 50, and we'll all be gathering together in Salem for, I believe, their 26th hosting of the Stag Bowl. And obviously, with their history of the Stag Bowl, it's only fitting, so can't wait to see you down there. But what's your last message to everybody out there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, to the committee, I appreciate all the hard work that they put in order to put together this tournament, and to the teams that are in it. I'm really excited because I think we have some exceptional matchups. I think the committee's done a great job at putting together the best bracket that we could with the at-large teams and with the AQs. And I'm really excited to see some of these matchups as they go from the first round through.
Matt, we really do appreciate your time and availability for this, and even coming out a little early so we can get this produced and out the door a little bit earlier ourselves. Obviously, it's not going to premiere until 5:30, so we'll see what the reactions of the teams are out there at 5 o'clock. I'm curious to watch the Twitter space to see what happens with respect to those reactions. So good job. I mean, obviously there will be people that will criticize this, that, or the other thing, but you made it through the process. You got 32 excellent teams into a tournament here. Let's start playing some playoff football, and good luck to your committee, as I'm sure we'll cross paths down the road here, as we said.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Matt Moore joining us, the committee chair, again, for the 16th straight season that we've existed. We've had that benefit here, and such a great honor to have that. JB, let's run through this, you and I, real quick one more time to go through matchups you're looking forward to, and second-round matchups you're seeing, maybe even third-round matchups that you're seeing begin to form here overall. So floor is mainly yours here as we look at first this bracket. I will name the matchups real quick. Wisconsin Lacrosse hosting Minnesota Morris. Aurora hosting a Pool C co-team. Trinity, just barely, it looks like, hosting Hardin-Simmons. And North Central, not really a one seed, it looks like, the way they've been perched in here against Belhaven. Again, not seeds, but tiers, we get it, but not necessarily the top team treatment in this quadrant. Go ahead, what are you seeing here?
Well, once again, I'll not to be a broken record, but the lacrosse placement as the one with that head-to-head loss to Hardin-Simmons, it doesn't seem like that dinged them in any way. The fact that the WIAC is the belle of the ball and the toughest conference in the country, that carried enough weight to put them in a number one spot over the defending champs. This conference didn't advance past the quarterfinals last year either. So I think in a lot of ways, sometimes they get a little too much credit, but at the same time, I've been watching their games all year. They're obviously very talented football programs and very strong. If I'm a Trinity fan, I think I'm frustrated to think like the second week of my playoff run could end in the suburbs of Chicago. That's a really tough draw for them. And it just goes back to, it's just hard to believe that letdown in week one is probably the reason why this is happening. It really does underscore and I think Coach Moore sort of hit on it as well. The winning it's one thing, go out and schedule the best teams that you can, but guess what? You got to win those games. And if you don't, it can come back to bite you. And this is a perfect situation here for the Tigers, where if they were just able to, it's just it breaks my heart a little bit for them. I thought they would have maybe a 3 or 5 game run into the playoffs, but the way North Central's been playing, I don't see anyone beating them in that side of things. So we'll have to see if I'm right or wrong.
How's Chicago on Thanksgiving weekend sound for me, I guess, is where if they can get through Hardin-Simmons, which is not going to be easy with Hardin-Simmons back at full strength.
No. Yeah,
so,
no, that's one of the toughest opening round games there is, period.
Let me ask you, now that it's just you and me and nobody else can hear us right now, would you pick Co?
No, I don't think so. The ARC is a good conference, but it's typically not as well regarded as the Centennial or as some other conferences out there. So, sure, they played Wartburg close. I thought, a win's a win, a loss, but this might be a case where a 6-point loss was helping. I don't know. It was kind of a surprise. Hey, happy for them. I'm sure they'll be thrilled, but it doesn't help any of the other teams that were like, hey, wait a minute, what about us?
True or false? If Co was in Region 2, they would not have a ranked win.
True.
And therefore would not have gotten selected if they were in Region 2 because of the jam that's occurring in Region 2, basically. And that's what we talk about in terms of the resume boosting by Iraq. They can do it in 4 or 5, maybe even 6 a little bit, 3 somewhat. 2, they can't do it. There's just too many conferences of strength with champions that have to get ranked, and then you basically block out a third team of a conference from being in there, the third team being the team that the second team usually has beaten in that situation. It's just impossible in that. So maybe he feels that Region 2 isn't kind of snake bitten by it, but at the same time, Region 5 benefits from the lack of depth in terms of number of conferences and teams in Region 5. That's how Co gets selected. Co, great season, 9-1, 503 strength of schedule, 1-1 against regionally ranked opponents. He didn't seem to say we were wrong on that. I just don't see where it comes from ultimately beyond that regionally ranked win that got manufactured by Region 5's RAC, ultimately putting Central in as a ranked team. That's my takeaway from that. I agree with you. No, I would not select them either. But, go show them. Go show the committee they were right. Go give them the backup for that. Yep, that's what it's going to come down to. Let's go bottom left. Wartburg hosting Illinois College, the Midwest Conference champion. Whitworth, a last-second entrant yesterday in Pool A.
By the wire.
Literally. They get Chapman in that whole West Coast trip scenario.
Rematch.
Wheaton hosting Mount St. Joseph. Wheaton being a Pool C team that's hosting, and Wisconsin Whitewater, a Pool C team that's hosting versus Bethel. And I guess what we're seeing is that they realized they were giving two hosting scenarios to two Pool C teams. So if they're able to get through, they're going to have to knock each other off, one or the other, in this whole thing. Yeah. So maybe that's where they paid a little credit to the notion that Pool C shouldn't always get home games all the way through. So somebody's going to have to prove their worth in that second round. Wheaton versus Wisconsin Whitewater, a pretty good matchup, I think, this season.
Yeah.
If both teams can get through, and there's no gimmies in those matchups right there. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think if that happens, which, given that we've seen a lot of chalk this year, I imagine Whitewater would be the home team in a second-round game against Wheaton. It seems pretty clear that Matt said that they were using the ranking numbers from the regional rankings as part of the tiering. I'm not going to say the other word. We'll say tiering, which I think was well played. So, yeah, in that case, and I think that would make sense. And then, yeah, you should probably get potentially a Whitewater Wartburg quarterfinal matchup, or maybe we'll get a surprise and we'll see, a Whitworth, or maybe we'll see a Wheaton. I mean, I don't know. This bracket's pretty competitive. There's a number of teams that I could see coming out of that and ending up in the semifinals. So I like this lower quadrant. Lots of interesting stuff happening.
Let's see the other lower quadrant, the lower right side. You've got Johns Hopkins hosting WestCon. As you said, getting kind of a 1C treatment is Johns Hopkins here in this one. Delaware Valley is hosting Union. Yep, Delaware Valley is hosting Union, who is another Pool C player here, basically the fourth and final one that we're seeing in our rewrap. Go ahead.
This is another thing, like what we were talking about before. Typically a second place team from the Liberty League Conference, that's usually a pretty strong team. And so Del Val was number 2 in Region 1. And Union, because of the car pileup that is Region 2, is a 6, right?
But here, good point. Great point. So now, go back to the question.
We'll be a favorite in this game.
Well, let's look back, though, for a second to the question I asked about, and let's put it on the screen, and we'll jump it for a second here. You have two undefeated versus undefeateds here, one of which involves East Region-esque teams, Region 1-2 teams.
Yeah.
Wasn't this avoidable? Couldn't they have put a 10-0 versus a 9-1 and a 10-0 versus a 9-1? Ultimately, they couldn't have created that scenario. I'm having trouble. No.
Yeah.
I just don't get what the thought process was here in this respect, because look at all the losses that are in this bottom right quadrant, and that's fine that Hopkins gets the benefit of it. But then again, we're going to go back up here. Kind of a neat little thing we were able to do graphically there. I didn't realize we had that capability, but you can see what's happening. Imagine my surprise as the thing goes zoom. But anyways, Look at the losses here. There aren't many. Throughout Alfred State, and there's 2 total losses in this quadrant up on the upper right. And so that tells you that there may have been some variation able to happen there. Now I'm just doing it because I'm having fun with it. But, Christopher Newport, 3 losses, WestCon 2 losses, Ithaca 2 losses, 1-1-1. I mean, this side of the bracket really makes me question some things, JB. And what are your thoughts on, basically that question? And then we'll go back up to the upper right in a second to identify those matchups.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you've got matchups where there's road teams that are going to be heavy favorites to win. Ithaca going to Springfield. I mean, I know the Pride are a tough team, and honestly, they've given Liberty League and Empire 8 teams, good runs for their money in the past. But, could you have put an 8-2 Ithaca, against a team from, let's say, Ohio or Pennsylvania? Yeah. There's just a lot of different possibilities of how this thing could have shaped up. I mean, WestCon going to Hopkins is no big surprise. Even CNU going to Randolph-Macon is no big surprise. We originally kind of talked that Belhaven could have been that team. They're obviously going to North Central on a flight up there, so they were going to fly no matter what. So that's neither here nor there. So they keep the cost down by having 2 teams from Virginia play. Ithaca to Springfield is a short trip. Union to Del Val is a short trip, relatively speaking, and but it does create some. The Midwestern fans are going to be like, oh my God, Hopkins got the easiest bracket in the world. It's not fair. The East is so bad. Sound familiar?
Yep. Let's go to the upper right. Mount Union hosting Alfred State. Alma, undefeated, hosting undefeated DePaul. Endicott with 1 loss. Hosting Cortland with 1 loss. And Cortland probably is sitting there saying, how did this happen?
What?
We lost to Susquehanna.
How do we win Cortica? Yeah, I know. Like, how do we end up being sent on the road here? Like, what's going on?
Well,
they win the Empire 8 and.
Well, look at this though. So Ithaca beat Endicott. Cortland beat Ithaca. Endicott hosts Cortland.
And they're both 3s according to what we can figure out. And because obviously we'll have to see them after the fact, but we assumed. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Like, why isn't Endicott going to Cortland?
I don't get it, to be honest with you.
I don't know.
And we'll have to see the regional rankings when they come out tonight or tomorrow. He, I think, was lacking the full information for when we were asking him that question. That's fine. And like I said, we're going to get the ultimate answer, and we'll tweet about it later if something else shows up.
But the only thing I can think of here, Frank, is you look at. I mean, and these could have changed. So when we were looking at our slides from before, Del Val was second tier seed, whatever you want to call it. Their SOS was 526. Endicott's was 573. Both had 2-1 records. Is it possible that somehow, unbeknownst to us, that Endicott jumped to a 2 over Del Val?
Look right now.
I don't know.
Yeah, it actually is very likely. I see what you're saying. We didn't catch it last night.
I think that's what the deal is.
But I mean, okay, great. The common opponent tells you, though, that maybe you got to give merit when you're comparing cross-regionally that Cortland deserved a host if they beat Ithaca and Endicott didn't in the end. I mean, that's...
Yeah.
I don't get that one. That's staying too religious to a number that you have to verify with your eyes at that point in your knowledge of what happened. That one I don't agree with whatsoever. I'll be clear on that one. In Springfield and Ithaca are having the same issue where Ithaca's going to say why, and the answer is Springfield is the number 1 seed in the Region 1, and Ithaca says again, well, why? Still, it doesn't answer the question for them. Susquehanna hosting Grove City.
Yeah, I mean, that should have been avoided too. I mean, especially when you assume that Grove City was the 4 seed in Region 2. They deserve a home game. I mean, Union could have traveled to play them. I mean, that would have been within 500 miles. Or Ithaca could have traveled down to play them. I mean, I just don't get why they had to, I mean, maybe it's more cost effective to stick a couple of schools from Pennsylvania that are a few miles apart from each other and you save some gas money or something. It doesn't really register to me. There could have been some better setups here. But the thing that visually stands out to me most about this upper right bracket, Frank, is that you have like the top half is basically all Region 4 plus the ECFC champ, which was going to probably end up there anyway. And then you have like a Region 1/2, kind of round robin and the second half below. So it's like a 2-4. Or 4-2, however you want to call it, when it's all said and done. But Mount Union will be a heavy favorite, and I think most people will pencil them in to be in the semifinals playing Hopkins or Randolph-Macon.
Well, listen, last thoughts here on our interview with Matt. What did you take away from it, I guess, is the ultimate question. What are some of the things that you might have wanted to hear better answers to, perhaps even because you don't necessarily buy into it as a fan or as somebody that's done this for how many years with me here? Basically, you've been doing 14 of these, I think, out of the 16 as a direct co-host. So, I mean, what's your thought here?
And it's funny. I was thinking, like, wait a minute. Well, we didn't do one in 2020, but we still talked to the committee chair, even though we didn't really have a season. So I guess that counts in certain respects. And, I still feel like at the end of the day, the Johnnies are going to have a valid beef about not getting in. As I said, though, I'm okay with this because I feel like if you lose by 4 touchdowns to a runner-up, you don't win your conference, you lose to a team that's not even on the board, I'm okay with them not making the tournament. I think maybe under the criteria it doesn't make sense. It does seem like the win-loss percentage might have had a higher weighting on things than we realized when it came to all the Pool C selections were 9-1 teams. Let's leave it at that. And I like the fact that, Matt was pretty honest about using the regional rankings, not as seeds, but as tiers. And he did allude that the 1-2 thing is still out there. So, no real surprises per se. I don't think this is going to change our perceptions that from day one we thought that the chances of a North Central Mount Union rematch was pretty likely. The way this is laid out, it looks like that there's a good chance that will happen, barring some kind of surprise. And at the end of the day, it's a tough job to do. I certainly appreciate all the time and effort that the different coaches on the racks and the national committee and all that put in. At the end of the day, teams are going to have to play, and we'll see what happens. And by December 15th, late in that evening, we'll have a national champion, and we'll see what happens.
Toughest path for a legitimate team that we thought would be a contender here, I got to call it to Trinity. That has to go through Hardin-Simmons, likely North Central, and then possibly La Crosse or Aurora just to get to this semifinals, basically. That is not an easy trip at all, and so Trinity is going to have to really quickly get back on their A game because they've been playing some inferior competition in the second half of the season pretty much, or almost the entirety of it. And so they're going to have to really face a challenge. I haven't seen, if they can get through the Stag Bowl somehow, it will be one of the toughest paths I've ever seen.
Yeah, and this once again goes back to, I think, a point that we had said earlier on. The other big takeaway I got from Coach Moore was go out and schedule the best teams that you can, but you better win. And that's always going to be the give and take now of what coaches are going to have to decide, like, what's the risk? If we lose this game, how is it going to impact me? At the end of the day, for a team like Trinity, losing to St. John's did not impact their ability to make the tournament because they could obviously win the SAA. They did. But clearly, that loss, to me, is like haunting them with this placement. If they were a 10-0 team, they would not be playing North Central in the second round. That's it.
Flat out, you're right. But then the schools are going to have to question, is it worth paying $10,000 for these big flights and everything else that they have to get involved with in the regular season games? And if you absolutely have to win the game and a loss is not going to be acceptable to at least bolster your resume, do you really want to take that risk? That's going to be up to the teams to decide that, and the schools, not for us. But all we can do is become a vehicle to ask the questions, ultimately, that you're wondering the answers to. There it is. So, JB, those that are wondering, ECAC Bowl announcements, noontime Eastern Time on Monday. So come back and see us for that. If you are interested, we will be tweeting out bowls as we see them for the several other bowl games that exist out there. And congratulations to those that will be going bowling, because not everybody gets that opportunity for that postseason game, the extra week of practice, etc. So, use it and enjoy it, and we will hopefully get some good reactions tomorrow from that as well. So until then, we'll see you. Thanks again to JP Williams and the NCAA and Matt Moore from Northwestern Minnesota for joining us. Take care, folks.